loving it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Designer's Den. And I'm super excited today to have my friend Andrew Bishkinskyi on, who also happens to be an amazingly talented author, among other things. Welcome to the show, Andrew. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name is Andrew Bishkinskyi, and you can find me on Twitter at Jays and Dragons, which is an obscure Twitter name from because I did Twitter way before I did anything else on Twitter. I'm a D&D designer, dungeon master, player. I always say I'm a player first because
I mean,
I love
that's where we all started,
I
probably.
love playing D&D.
Yeah.
But I've written a number of things for D&D Adventures League, including one of the seasonal adventures, Stop at the Gate, and probably about 20 CCC adventures. Best known ones probably Six Summoned Swords and the rest of that series. And I've worked on a number of other things from Kickstarters to just other general DM's Guild compilations and things, some of which we might talk about with Jenny. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And a little bit of convention organization for the cherry on top. Just a little. Just a little. But yeah, so Six Swords series. So that, that's as good a place to start as any. So yeah, we'll start with a little discussion on your Six Swords Out of Hell series, because that's the one you're highlighting at the top of your Twitter right now. So it looks real fancy and everything, and I'm a fan of it. So yeah, why don't you walk us through a little bit, like, how this came to be for people who aren't really familiar necessarily with the PipYap CCC program.
Sure. So the Adventurers League Community Created Content, or as we lovingly say, CCC program, until recently was the program through which you created Adventurers Legal for Adventurers League Play. And prior to last year, there was a very complex submission process, which took months and months, and you had to work with convention organizers and administrators, and it was. But last year, they did something interesting, is to support the descent into Avernus. They released a PipYap's Guide to Night and Hells. PipYap is this little devil character, which appears in many Adventurers League adventures. And it had some story seeds that allowed authors and DMs to essentially create their own adventures, so long as they were set in the Nine Hells and sort of met some specific criteria. It was kind of a precursor to the new program, Dungeon Craft, which is
which
was in a way a preview.
And that has seeds for Rhymes of the Frost Maiden. But so you saw PipYaps come out, and that was your opportunity to tell everyone to go to hell.
That's right. In bright red letters too. Yeah, I had some plans with my Six Sword series, or the series of mostly drow-related adventures that I've been writing over the last couple of years. I had plans for kind of a tier 3 adventure series, because I've never ventured into tier 3, because I always thought that, it's like, well, I'm not quite ready for tier 3 because it's really difficult and it's really complex to write about, and kind of, I want to get better at this before I jump into tier 3. Kind of want to earn my wings or whatnot.
Very sensible.
Yeah. And so after a couple of years of writing and a bunch of adventures, which I thought went well, and if people hated them, most people didn't tell me about it, which, thank you. But some people did. So I've had people tell me I wrote the worst adventure ever. It's okay. We had a good talk.
Yeah, but they paid money for it already, so it doesn't matter. That's fine.
That's right. Yeah, I don't ask them where they got it.
They paid for it, definitely.
They paid for it, of course. But yeah, so I felt I was kind of ready to do tier 3, and then just around that time, this PipYap program was coming out and said, well, you can do a tier 3, but you just have to set it in hell. And I'm like, well, the plans I have for tier 3 are kind of not in hell. But if life gives you hell, light a fire. I don't know what's.
So though tier 3 is in Maladamini, which isn't exactly on fire.
There's some fire.
A little bit of fire.
it's like the bureaucratic layer. So
Yeah.
yeah, so tier threes had to be set in Maladamini, which is the kind of hellish bureaucracy. And I was faced, like, my first design challenge that I kind of set for myself was, how do I make bureaucracy fun?
That is a serious challenge to start out with right there.
Yeah, and I can't tell you if I have or not. I certainly tried. There's a part of the adventure where the player challenge is to sit waiting in a waiting room, and
Hmm.
that's as much as I'm going to say about it. But hopefully, it's a little more fun than that. But
Well, that is a hallmark of bureaucracy. Sit and wait. And wait.
yeah, so that's kind of how that adventure came about. And because at that time the CCC program was kind of starting to wind down, they kind of stopped accepting CCCs, and eventually they announced that they would be transitioning into Dungeon Craft. So I kind of figured this is my last chance to really do something, big and something kind of entirely my own. So I just kind of threw everything in it. I said, you know what, this is going to be an 8-hour adventure because that was the longest you could do. And I'm like, I'm just going to do one, but it's going to be the biggest, bestest thing ever. And I dove into like research. The beautiful thing about working with DM's Guild or working on Forgotten Realms things is there's an infinite amount of research you can do.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
so
I'm
much
sure you
lore
know.
available. Yeah. Oh my god. I don't want to talk about the hours of research I've done on the Forgotten Realms.
So that's kind of the rabbit hole down which I went, like trying to find all this old lore about, well, what do we know about Maladomini and who lives there and who are the archdevils? And I ended up going to like 1980s dragon magazines. And there was some big article on the Nine Hells and describing all the archdevils and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to include all these people. And just I'm just gonna throw everything in it because it's tier 3 and you can do whatever you want.
Hmm.
um, and there's an amusement park in hell,
Of course.
apparently, which is also in Maladomini, which is great. um, so yeah, that's kind of where I went. And I, because it was kind of my pseudo last big thing, I kind of decided, you know what, just gonna pull out all the stops and get some art. And I got to work with Joe Barano, who did some of the art. He didn't do the cover. The cover is by a local artist here named James Austin, who did an awesome cover. But I got to work with Joe Barano, who I met at another con, and
Uh,
who also did layout for it
Game
here
Hole?
in Chicago and out your way.
Game Hole Con, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, Joe, I met him at Opportunity Attacks,
Oh, okay. Yeah. At Frank's
and
little
then I think
convention.
and I think I talked to him at Gamehole. I
Hmm.
think.
Joe's a
Um,
wonderful guy, talented artist, and
he's a
exceptional layout artist.
Yeah, and he did the layout for it. And it was funny because I was thinking, like, usually I do my own layout because who can afford layout when, don't tell people on DMs. Oh, wait, they're probably watching. Anyhow, so good layout costs a lot of money, deservedly so, because it takes a lot of time. And I had generally just done my own thing unless I was working for
Hmm.
somebody who can pay for layout. But I started asking around, well, who can do layout for this like 100-page book that I was doing? And I actually got given Joe's name, and I got told, hey, you know what? He actually did the layout for Pip Yap's Guide to
He
the Nine
did.
Hells. And I'm like, can you do mine? And can you make it kind of like that, but different enough so it's legal? And yeah, so we did that, and it looks amazing, I think. So
Well, the thing about Pip Yaps is it's technically only a DM's Guild product, so it's not trade dress. So even if it has exactly the same layout style, you're good.
yeah, so if it
Because the beauty of DM's Guild is that you can borrow from fellow creators. Please credit them if you do, but all of that material is there for you to reference and use to draw inspiration from and to build upon. Do it.
well, and it was one of the AL administrators behind PPF's Guide who gave me Joe's name. So I'm like, okay, well, clearly there's not an issue there.
Right.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
I was
so
very
you wrote this gigantic adventure in hell, and it was 8 hours long.
and I ran it at cons. I think I've run it 3 or 4 times in 9-hour time slots
Okay.
at cons.
And you
live.
and you ran it online, I assume?
I've not run it online.
I was gonna say it's a little bit different trying to run a very long adventure online. I've got the 6 hour Dreams of Red Wizards one that I wrote, and I've never run it in 6 hours online ever. I did a 7.5 hour run of it.
That, we played it. It took us more than 6 hours.
Yeah, it's just a lot going on. Like you said, it's tier 3, and you're like, what can I do? That's a good idea, and that's a good idea. Yeah, and then Dar Jr. Chimed in a little bit ago to say the Curse of the Forgotten Realms office is indeed lore research, which.
That's right.
I mean, it's both a curse and a blessing because you don't have to come up with all these things on your own because there's so much pre-existing stuff that you can just kind of dig through it and find like a tidbit you love and like go from there versus like other things like you know, if you're coming up with a whole world of your own, like literally everything, you have to think of it all. You can't just be like, what's a cool location that already exists? We're gonna set it in Zentarum Keep, you know? And then you don't have to build out the keep, you just have to build the cool thing that happens in the keep, or the cool thing that happens in Maladamini in this case. So I think it makes it a little easier, yeah?
Yeah, and the neat thing about the Forgotten Realms, in a really bizarre way, because in most worlds, having this like complete disparity because there's many editions and many versions of everything. In any other world, this would drive people crazy, but in Forgotten Realms, it actually works really nice because you find something in like a second edition magazine, and you're like, oh, okay, this is what I'm looking for. But I can totally change it because technically this is second edition. So I can like take the name and it still sounds like it matches. But if somebody ever says, oh, your stuff doesn't match, and I can just say, oh, that was second edition.
Or you could be like, well, so I mean, maybe it was written by Volo, and as we all know, he's a very unreliable narrator. So, like, is that right or is this right? Like, who knows?
Yeah, and it's a very neat thing about the operating in the Forgotten Realms that way, because you can like there's enough seeds there, like you said, like there's names for everything, and like you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you at the same time can kind of go your own way with things.
You can make it a very different will.
For sure.
Yeah. And so, you know, I definitely like that. And I like that you haven't really been afraid to, since you've gotten your hands on it, to kind of branch out there and embrace that high level content, which is something like a lot of creators still don't do because it is kind of terrifying. It's very daunting because if you've ever played high tiers, you know how many options your character has, and it is overwhelming. Multiply that times 7 people, and the amount of things that they have available to them to break your module is real high. Yep. So going into something like that from a design perspective, as you're saying, like it's you sit there and you're thinking about it, and you're like, okay, so what can I do here that they're not just going to trivialize? And I think Hell offers you a lot of opportunities there specifically.
Yeah, and be in a lot of ways, it kind of when you get into higher tier design, like tier 3 and 4, it becomes less about like are the adventurers are going to win, and more about how are they going to win.
More about the story, yeah, the story. It definitely becomes a lot more narrative driven at high levels, like. Okay, they're inevitably going to win because they have so many options available to them. But, like, why do they care? What are they doing? What are the setbacks? Like, who shows up? Like, that's the cool stuff. Like, yeah. And and then also you get to throw out some really cool magic items.
You do.
So, I mean, yeah. I don't even remember what magic items I gave out in Foreign Affairs. There were magic items though, I'm sure there were.
Uh, I gave out the double-bladed lightsaber. I mean, it's a sun sword with
No,
flavor. Yeah, it was a sun sword with flavor.
I think it's a
With
shield. I don't know. It's hard to
yeah.
remember. But yeah, so you've worked on that and you've worked on a bunch of other stuff. But you've been doing some collaborative projects lately, right?
I
Um,
have. I with the CCC program kind of in limbo for like almost a year, and then finally announced transitioning. I was kind of going project to project. It's like, well, I'll do this little thing while I wait for them to announce what's going on, and then
mhm.
do this little thing and while I wait for them to announce what's going on, and sort of kept taking little things, and I found that a lot of projects that I try to look for things that I haven't done before
Right.
or things that would allow me to sort of do something different and kind of grow as a designer and grow as a collaborator. So, um,
And one of them that you had that I think you wanted to touch on was one that when I saw it scrolling through your list of products, it kind of stood out to me because it looked, just based on the cover, judging the book by its cover originally, it looked pretty cutesy, you know? So,
um,
Rescue, a familiar tale.
uh, yeah, so this was something I found through well, I got involved through the DMs Guild Discord. There's a creator Discord, and somebody was looking for a writer, and they posted this idea that we want to have an adventure where the characters take on the roles of familiars,
Mm-hmm.
where the masters or the familiar owners, like the wizards and the warlocks, got kidnapped or whatnot, and the adventurers get to play as the familiars. And I'm like, well, that sounds really clever. And I'm like, well, I don't usually do cute animals, or I haven't done cute animals, but I'm like, you know
I
what?
know.
I've never done it. Maybe I should do it. So, and I like the cleverness of the idea. And it's the folks that did it, they're called Transparent Games, and they're led by a wonderful lady named Anna. So she was the one who kind of got in touch with me and said, we're looking for a writer for this. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what I did. And she's like, well, I played your adventure and you're hired. And I'm like, okay. Uh, because that was kind of a small world. Because outside of AL, not a lot of people I find play AL adventures.
That is that well, yeah, that is true.
Yeah, so it turned out to be probably the most unique thing I've done because I wrote it as we talked about it in a collaboration, but we kind of made the decision that it's not going to be, you know, kind of like what is it called, Pugmire or some of these other games where
Mm-hmm.
like you have a full class but you're a dog. We kind of decided, and I was very much my fault. So if you don't like it, blame me. But that you are going to be the familiar. If you're playing the frog, your stat block's going to be of a frog.
Oh, okay.
So if you're the frog familiar, you're the frog. And the first design challenge I set myself when writing that is like, I am going to make the seahorse work in this.
Seahorses. So
Yeah.
seahorses have a limited amount of environments that they really thrive in. So that's a tricky one there.
Yeah, and but I kind of said, you know what? Somebody could have a seahorse. It's on the list.
Yeah.
It's on the list.
I mean,
So
there are aquatic elves,
yeah,
and they can
um,
be an adventurer just as well as anybody else. So, you know,
yeah. So the challenge there, or the interesting thing there, was to create an adventure where the characters could progress through it with these very limited sort of stat blocks. And there are a few surprises sort of later on where you get to do a little bit more than just um,
be a frog. Just a
be a
little bit
frog.
more.
Spoiler
Yeah.
alert. But yeah, so that was something really interesting to work on, and Anna had got us a lot of amazing art for the book. And if you saw the cover looks just absolutely gorgeous.
The cover is gorgeous. It's just
Yeah, so
woodland scene, and it's just
yeah, and it was a big cute thing, and everybody doesn't necessarily die in it, like
mm-hmm.
in everything else I do. Um, it's but they might. I couldn't not include like something absolutely horrific. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, eh, you know, it's kind of your trademark a little bit to include something a little awful, but not that awful. Just
and it's usually optional.
yeah,
Um, but
certainly.
yeah, and you can kind of play that adventure as um, like one would think that you're playing these super simple things, that it's actually a beginner adventure, and it's actually kind of not. It's more actually the way it turned out is probably like experienced players would probably get a kick out of it just because they get to flex their creative muscles in not having all their common abilities, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of like, how do I do this as a frog? If I was a paladin, I'd be able to do this, but if I'm a frog, I have limited options. But the adventure kind of lends itself to that.
Mm-hmm. It does, and I actually have the beautiful cover up now. So let me show the cover for a second. And yeah, and the
I
artwork is
haven't
really good. It's like almost like pointillism as the style of painting, and it really kind of adds like this texture to it that makes it really kind of pop rather than just being like a traditional painting even. And so kudos to the artist on
whose name I don't remember. I'm sorry.
the artist whose name is is oh god, Agnieszka Kotlowska. I butchered that, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was pretty close. I don't remember who did the cover art, but she did an amazing job. So
Yeah, that's the only name listed on the DM Skilled product page, so I'm going to assume that she did the cover art, but maybe not.
there's a lot of cool things on it.
Yeah.
Anyway, check it out if you are looking for something different. It can also work. It can totally work as a campaign starter, regardless of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a unique way to kick something off, especially if your players don't know.
And I think that would be a lot of fun for like younger people too, to kind of get them involved in it, because who doesn't want to play as an adorable little animal when you're well, I was going to say when you're younger. I mean, I'm older and I still want to play as an adorable little animal, so I guess the target market is kind of all over the place. Um, but yeah, so um, you've definitely got a wide range here now going on for your content that you've been creating. So, um, what sort of project are you thinking that you'd want to do next? I imagine you're doing some dungeon craft.
I've done a dungeon craft. I actually did the first ever dungeon craft.
Imagine that.
Yeah. It's called Ogre Crush, and it's ironically, I was very happy that your epic came out after it, because if your epic had come out before it, I would have never published it, because it's extremely similar in that you're in a town and you set up some defenses and then there's a siege. And I was very glad that mine was already done and out when yours came out.
And we didn't collaborate on that at all. We didn't plan that.
No, but at the same time, it's not the first time it's been done either. Even in AL,
Yeah.
like what was the season 5 called? That was really cool. Was the big siege? The final adventure there was really great. With all the giants attacking.
Siege at Parnast or something?
Yes,
Parnast Under
Parnassus
Siege?
Under Siege.
Yeah. Parnast Under Siege. Yeah, that was a good one. And but I mean, yours is different anyways, because yours is obviously made for a single table, and so that like makes it a lot more accessible for your average DM versus the epic, which definitely can be run for a single table and will be available in the DM's Guild, so people can try it and see if it works for their table. But it's nice to have variations on that theme, even if it is essentially the same mechanic going on. So there's room for both. There's room
Oh,
for both.
absolutely, absolutely, and it's a little different. And I one thing I always enjoy in I find that I really enjoy in my games when I DM is trying to get people's character backgrounds involved. Backgrounds in the sense of, are you a sailor? Are you a town guard, etc. I usually try to ask people what their background is, and then later on, when it becomes relevant, hopefully, or if they need to make a check, I like to relate it to sort of to their background. So I kind of codified it in this adventure because the first kind of part of the adventure, the role play bit before everything goes to hell, is you're in town, you're in Lonelywood, and you find yourself without work and without a place to stay, and essentially you the places you get offered to stay depend on who you are in as
Who
a
you
character.
are, what you know, what skills you have available. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And in a environment such as 10 towns where it's, I don't want to say survival of the fittest, but if you don't have something to offer, they're very unlikely to take you in because it's a very harsh environment. Like that totally makes sense. I got a
Yeah.
couple of characters who are sages, sage background, and so they'd bring a wealth of knowledge. Maybe maybe their knowledge is herbalism, which that's always a useful skill in remote environments.
Always.
Always, or whatever it is they know. Uh, maybe they studied the anatomy of giants. Who knows? Who knows what they studied? We can figure it out. Um, most of them actually studied fire and fire related things, but that's neither here nor there.
I'm not well. Um, I'm not gonna say that. Well, maybe I should say potentially. If you are a sage and you studied fire related things, and certain things happen during Ogre Crush, potentially you will get an official card declaring you as a member of Team Fireball.
No, I'm out.
Yeah, I know.
I'm out. I'm out.
But you studied
I'm
fire
gonna.
things. What do you
I'm gonna.
expect to do?
I'm gonna go recruit the owlbears. It's fine.
Uh,
We'll save the town. Team Owlbear. Team Owlbear. Ah. See, this is what happens when I surround myself with Canadians. They all of a sudden decide that everything has to be about fireballs.
right? It's cold here. We like our fireballs to keep warm.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, actually, though, in a weird way. All right. So yeah, no, a little bit of talk about the design process. Then you've done. Oh, I just had it up. So at least 32 things. That's bright. So bright. At least 32 things now. If not more, that aren't necessarily listed directly under your name. So you've got a little bit of experience with staring at a blank piece of paper or digital paper and ending up with an adventure, which that is definitely a skill. So I guess the question a lot of people want to know first is like, how did you get started in it? What made you want to write for RPGs?
Um, so I've been playing RPGs for I think almost 5 years. I don't know because the last year I pretend didn't happen, so the math gets weird.
It's been like
Um,
40 years this last year.
yeah, so like time has just gotten really strange. But yeah, so 4 or 5 years ago I started playing D&D. Like I knew what D&D was, but like the pen and paper game I only have been playing for 4 or 5 years now. I had played the Baldur's Gate computer
Okay.
game and read the Drizzt books when I was young, but I had not played until early. But I did write when I was in school, and if my school offered a double major, I might have had a double major creative writing. But as it is, I like to tell the story when I went to my first creative writing lecture in uni, the first thing the professor said was, the average writer in Canada makes $10,000. If that's why you're here, please leave.
Oh,
That was
and
first day of class in university.
I mean that checks out. I did some creative writing classes in college too, and the professor was like, "You can make a career out of this, but you won't make money out of it."
Yeah. Yeah. So I wrote, like, I've liked writing since I was like 5. I think the first thing I wrote and handed in to somebody in terms of a creative writing story, I think I was like 8. And But kind of didn't get to do it professionally, or in any kind of really creative sense, until I started doing D&D. And I started doing D&D, and I started helping out with cons, and I learned how to GM. And I saw that some people were writing things, and I'm like, hey, always wanted to write. I'd like to maybe write a thing. And I was so nervous about pitching my thing to the first con director person, that I said, when he said, well, maybe, etc., I said, you know what, I'm going to write the whole thing. And if you want me to write it for you, you can tell me after I write it if you want it.
I'm gonna write it, or try before you buy.
Yeah. So basically, I wrote most of Six Summoned Swords before I was even kind of officially asked to write it, and I just brought it to my now friend. At that point, we didn't really know each other. To my friend, and he looked at it. He said, "Okay, sure, yeah, you can do it for this con." And then that con got canceled, and something else happened, and like, it had been finished for like a year before it finally premiered, as some of these things go. But it did really well, and like by the time it premiered, I had already written a second one. Yeah, and so that's kind of how I got into it, and I wanted to write, and I had ideas.
I didn't know that entire story, but this doesn't surprise me because you're the same guy who brought your portfolio printed, right, to Winter Fantasy and just gave it to Chris Lindsay. Was that you? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was you. Hi, I've done some writing. Please consider me.
Is that not what you're supposed to do?
No, not really, but it obviously worked out for you.
No? That's not what people do. They give their portfolio to people who they might want to write.
In normal creative writing world, yes. In the RPG world, no, not really. But the initiative you showed though was good. It was good, and you did get to write an official AL mod, so
I did.
You obviously did something right there with your presentation.
I assume I showed up. Yeah, I don't know. To me, that was kind of a normal thing. Like, shortly after I think it was before Six Summoned Swords premiered, Jeremy Crawford came out here for one of our events, and I got a chance to play at his table, which remains the possibly greatest game I've ever played in my life. But
I'm not surprised.
And like, I'm like, I wrote an adventure. It might be published next year. Please take it. And so somewhere in a con trash bin, there's that adventure that Jeremy Crawford held.
You don't know that it's in a con trash bin. It could be somewhere at Jeremy's house, or it could be in any trash bin between the con and Jeremy's house.
Yes. Yes. Any of those things could be true.
Yeah.
And are equally likely.
Or he's an environmentally conscious guy. It could have ended up in Jeremy's compost.
Yeah, it's probably recycled.
Yeah, it's probably recycled.
Yes, and at least one copy of my portfolio was probably recycled by Chris Perkins at the Game Hall. Because why not?
Though, I honestly admire the gumption to just go up and hand your portfolio to the people, because you know what you want. And
I know.
And no, it's a good thing. Like, I sound surprised and everything, but like, It is. It's a good thing. It's a good. You have the confidence, and you're willing to like be like, here's my work. You know,
And
no.
but that's what I want. I want my work to speak for me. I'm never going to be best friends with Chris Perkins or anybody who is best friends with him who is going to tell him, you know what, you should hire Andrew. Like all I have is my work to speak for me. So if I can get it to somebody and they might look at it, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, and honestly, that is my one earbud has decided it's dead. But yeah, honestly, like I think that's any author's goal is just to have their work speak for itself. And I hope that mine does. Um I mean, I know at least my epic speaks to some people in some way. I've definitely gotten people messaging me back with feedback like, I almost died 5 times. It was great. And I'm like, my little heart, I'm so happy right now. Not because they almost died, although that's a little thrilling, but because they thought the almost dying was great. Which, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the goal of any high stakes game, is to like have them feel like they're on the edge of the seat the whole time. And then even if they do die, they're still overjoyed about it because like it was so high paced, so exciting, so much going on, and by golly, they tried their best. And most likely took someone down with them.
Oh, that's right. You got to take them to the brink, and then just let them teeter a little bit, and then you bring them back. And it's like, there needs to be a sigh of relief.
They have to bring themselves back. I'm not doing it. But yeah, so when you sit down staring at your blank piece of paper, like, how do you start your design process? Do you start with like a really cool monster? Do you start with like a location that you really want to start, or do you start with like a whole story in your brain that you want to just build out? There's a lot of different methodologies that people use.
I don't want it to sound I don't know. I don't want to sound wrong, but I don't have that moment of sitting down with a blank piece of paper, at least not physically. I mean, at some point, yes, because when you turn on your word processor, it's blank.
Yeah, right.
And you open your notebook and it's blank. Although not mine, because all my notebooks are like semi-used, and I'll just find a random empty page between different notes.
I bought a new notebook the other day, so it is blank. But outside of that,
because did you notice that apparently when you have a notebook and you've written on page 1 and page 2, you're supposed to write on page 3 and not just open it to a random page and write?
So I'm not supposed to have this blank page and then this page written on?
Yeah. So apparently people like do the pages in order.
I don't understand.
Yeah, me neither. No.
And they always and some of them even always like write the same subject in one notebook, and they don't like have some D&D stuff and some work stuff in here, some con packing lists and some work stuff in here, some interview stuff and some D&D stuff in here, grocery list and a little bit of D&D and maybe some work in the other. These are just the ones I can reach.
I feel a great kinship to you right now. So yeah.
Mind you, they all look distinctly different. So I can at least be like, pretty sure I wrote it in the llama one, the pink llama one. Hand me the pink llama.
Yeah. So I was saying that I don't have that moment of the blank page, because typically before I open a notebook or before I turn on my word processor, I pace a lot. Like literally, I will pace up and down my apartment, and like I write it in my head.
No,
like,
I mean,
by the time
so your blank page is in here.
Yeah. It's just like getting it out. It's just okay.
And well, I mean, that's fine. So you don't start with the blank page, physically, but like, where does your idea start? Do you start your story with your? I mean, it could be like different for every story. Like sometimes you think like, like obviously it was probably a different process for the Six Swords Out of Hell than it was for the Six Swords of the Moonsea, because all of a sudden you're like, this has to be in hell. So you got to kind of start with hell a little bit and be like, well, what is in hell that I have to work with. But so, you know.
Yeah, so usually there is a sort of story seed or a story that I want to tell, and I kind of work it around the details. Um, it does vary. There are times when I will see a monster and I'll say, okay, I want to write a story that has this monster in it. And I'll kind of work backwards from it. Like I have a story where there's a Balhanoth,
And
which is a terrible Shadowfell monster which controls people's minds from like 3 miles away. And I read about it and I'm like, holy shit, this thing's really cool. And I want to write about it. And I thought, well, how can I, like, if this thing is there, like, it's clearly the end point of the adventure rather than the beginning. So I'm like, so this thing affects minds for miles around. So now I build out and I'm like, okay, so who is affected? It's like, okay, so how are they affected? And then how do they get to the adventurers? And it's like, well, the adventurers are here for this reason. And then they meet these people who are affected. And then they're in the dungeon and then Balhana. And it's sort of like the, yeah. So like sometimes it goes like that. And I've written like 2 or 3 like that kind of started at the monster. But I've written others where, you know, I had a specific story I wanted to tell. I mean, I worked backwards from the Balhanoth to write a 7 adventure series, where it's the end of the 7th one. Spoiler alert.
You really built that out. You're like,
yeah.
Okay, we gotta go back. No, we gotta go further. No, we gotta go deeper. It's like Inception there. You're like, okay, but like what's the next dream? But yeah, no. And then
I'm working on something now, which is again a different thing. I can't talk too much about it, but I can talk a little about it. It's a Kickstarter and it's a space-based setting, which I've never done. I love sci-fi and like The Expanse is my favorite thing ever. And so I'm like, well, where do I start with an adventure in space or a science fiction adventure? And I immediately thought, well, kind of what are, because they're sort of prototypical stories, right? Like, you know how every story has been told, and it's like, and like, what space stories do I like? There's the aliens type, there's the, you know, there's the kind of cyberpunky stuff, there's different things. And I thought, well, I like this idea of exploring a mysterious ship.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, so
well, if you watch the first episode of The Expanse, you know how that goes.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of why I went there. But I'm like, okay, so character is going to explore a mysterious ship. So I now need to figure out where that ship came from, and
what would be on it.
Yeah, but from there, like from a design standpoint, I'm like, okay, I know they're going to explore the mysterious ship. I go and I dive into the lore of this world, which other people have written. And I'm like, what here would be interesting to be a mysterious ship? I'm like, ooh, this stuff is kind of unexplored and would be super interesting. So I'm going to stick it on the ship. So now I know what's on the ship. And now I just need to say, well, who would send them to the ship? Or how would they get to the ship? And the story kind of just builds out. And by the time I sit down to write it, it's filling out the details. It's like creating, like, I know somebody sends them there and, you know, later betrays and murders them. And now I just need to decide who would be an interesting NPC to do that.
You mean it's not a mysterious SOS beacon? Not this time.
Oh, there is that too. I mean, that's just all of it, just kitchen sink.
I mean, and you can always too, if like you want to dive back to older D&D inspiration, something I recently started looking into, the original Appendix N books. Like I just read Invaders from Rigel. So Appendix N from the original D&D, I believe, was a list of books from the back of it that was just like served as inspiration. This is weird. This is a weird book. This is science fiction from like the 40s.
Cool. I read a lot of Jules Verne when I was growing up, but I think that's true. I
You,
don't know if people here do that. But...
you got to get weirder.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but it's got like all the classic influences that you think of when you think of like modern fantasy and stuff. So like Tolkien's on it, Lovecraft, uh, James Vance. This is Fletcher Pratt, and it's just there's a lot of stuff on there. So if you want to like dive back into the I guess the original inspiration for a lot of tabletop role playing games, I mean that's a neat place to start now that a lot of
Yeah.
people aren't as familiar with as used to be. Now a lot of it is dated. You'd need to update it because again, we're all familiar with how society was in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Um, they had some ideas, but I think that kind of leaves a lot of, like you said, literature. Great place to find this inspiration because then you could start with like there was this really cool concept in this one book that you liked, like The Expanse, and build out from there, make it different, throw in your favorite monsters, and then weave a story around it. And that's like by the time you've done that, you've got your inspiration from the book, you've got your monsters, like you've got half of it done. All you need now is like what gets your characters moving, what's the motivations.
Yeah,
I
and
mean, not that that's a small part. Like that's still a lot of work you got. But, you know, design isn't necessarily like a huge I guess like monolithic wall that you can't get over.
yeah, and like to me, it all goes back to the story and like uh, the. I kind of believe that if the story is interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean interesting to a DM, interesting that if you were to retell it to a different player, because obviously everybody would play out through something in different ways, so everybody's story would be a little different. But if the core story that your adventure is trying to tell is interesting, it'll be easy to find a hook into it because if it's interesting, people are going to be interested in it in world also. Like
Yeah.
if there's a great cool monster rampaging cities, adventurers are going to be interested in that.
All you really need is like these rumors. You just keep hearing these rumors and you're like, I've heard like 8 different versions of this monster and I can't really decide what's true, but they all sound better than the last. So like I got to go see myself with my own eyes. And like every time you hear about the monster, like the tales of its treasure or magic or whatever it is just get grander and grander, and so you're just like, I'm going to find out the truth. Like your character just wants to know. Or alternately, sometimes your character's like, I definitely don't want to know anything about this, but your party's like, yeah, but you're the one who knows everything about everything, so like we need you.
For sure.
You always have that one person who's like, oh, there's a monster? Yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah, but we need money, and it's like, well, could you just open the door for us?
Research costs money, you know? You can't fund all your research without pillaging some dungeons. That in itself is actually a pretty good I guess hook in for like a group of researchers, which actually kind of ties back into like a lot of the sci-fi movies and stuff. Why are they digging up this ruins in Antarctica where they find aliens? Well, because they needed money to do something else and someone was going to pay them real good to come down here and investigate this, and now there's aliens. See what happened?
And there's like, how many stories are in that? Like, just that alone, like somebody's digging in Antarctica. That's all you need, really.
I've read no less than a dozen books that start with somebody's digging in Antarctica and then something goes wrong, and they're all great. Like it starts innocently enough. We're digging in Antarctica, which, by the way, if I start hearing a news story this year with they're digging in Antarctica, I'm gonna be like, please don't. Can we stop? Must we? We already had 2020.
I have a wonderful book recommendation for you. It's
Yeah.
a Canadian book called Icefield.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna read Ice Builds.
It's not a very long book, but it's very cool. It's people in a glacier who think they saw an angel.
Oh, that does sound interesting. Okay, well, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I think the last conversation topic that I want to do before we get into social media and all of that is like your dream project. Like, obviously, we know you want to work with Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford, but like, what would you be doing? What would you be designing? Would you do like a dungeon crawl? Would you do like a big narrative thing? What would it be? What setting?
Um,
It might
it's
not. It might not be Crawford and Perkins. You could. It could be something else.
yeah. I mean, those are the just the people I had access to. Those were the people walking by during those particular cons. If there's somebody else, I'm sure I'll. When cons are a thing again, and you know what? If I had never done that, there's no chance now.
Yeah.
But anyhow, um, I found interestingly enough that a lot of the projects I've really enjoyed are not projects that I wanted. No, and I want to kind of clarify that in that, like, I wasn't looking to do a particular adventure, and just like somebody needed help or somebody sort of got in touch with me saying, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. Can you do it for me?" And I'm like, "Well, it's not really my thing, but okay, I'll do it."
And then you have
And
so
then,
much fun.
and I had so much fun. So I'm kind of I love like the ideas that I have and like the storylines I have in my head. I mean, I'd love to write a whole sort of campaign setting based around kind of the Drow city that I started creating, which is kind of different from like the other Drow cities in my AL adventures. I'd love to find kind of an audience for that somewhere, but at the same time, I feel like I could really do anything. I'm kind of leaning lately. I find myself more interested in kind of bigger projects. After working on Six Swords Out of Hell, kind of bring it around full circle, I really liked the freedom of writing for more than a 4 hours at the table resolution.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that you could like explore a little bit. You could put more into it. So I'd love to work like on a bigger sort of narrative from the perspective of like either like a full kind of
Like an
hard,
adventure book, yeah.
or it's like we need a 10 adventure series. Andrew, can you kind of lead it? So
Okay.
like that's kind of a dream project for me. It's kind of to do something big where I had input into how it happens and what it is.
Okay, so maybe like a big adventure path where you're kind of building out the world, or maybe even like a campaign setting book.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
could see
like.
that.
I'm more interested in adventures. I like
Right.
story. I like what happens, rather than. But I think that's part of like I came into D&D through Adventurers League
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, and because it's kind of limited to the setting that you have, I'm more about like I just want adventures for this setting. Like I don't really care about other settings.
No, I mean, and
Like,
that's
'cause
and
they're not
that's
good.
there's so much in the realms to explore that we haven't even yet explored that it's totally fine. So
But,
like,
I love Eberron. I got a chance to work on some Eberron stuff with the Across Eberron folks, and write an adventure for them. And I love the world of Eberron, so
it is
I'm
so
kind of like I have my feelers out to do more in Eberron because I'd really like to. So
yeah. Well, I think that would be cool to see some more Everon stuff from you. So yeah, no, I am looking forward to seeing what else you put out in the future, Eberron, Forgotten Realms, Drow, or otherwise. So, yeah, stay
oh
tuned for, and especially with this Kickstarter, this mysterious Kickstarter. So looking forward to that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been so good to talk to you again.
yes, thanks for having me on. It was really fun. It's I
Yeah.
can talk about creating things for like an unlimited amount of time, seemingly, which we won't today. But like, yeah,
I
I
mean,
love talking.
we'll do an hour now. We'll do an hour some other time. We'll just
Yeah.
But yeah, no, totally understand. Like you start talking about creating, and then somebody's like, "The time is up," and you're like, "But I just started. What? Wherever did it go?" But yeah, no. It's been a joy. Hearing about some of the behind the scenes stuff on these adventures that I've played and everything. So, can't wait to see what else you put out and all of that. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find your stuff and you on the internets and maybe some conventions you're going to be doing so they can come play with you?
Um, sure. You can find me on the Twitter at Jays and Dragons. Jays like the Toronto Blue Jays, and like the letter N, and Dragons like Dungeons and Dragons, because I made my Twitter account to enter a Blue Jays contest and ask Jeremy Crawford a sage advice question. So I was very uncreative in my name because I wasn't actually using it then. But that is what we have. Um, I play and occasionally DM, but mostly play on the Unite the Factions Discord server, which you can find through unitethefactions.com. That's kind of where I hang out. You're welcome. Anybody's more than welcome if you played my adventures or DM my adventures or want to talk about my adventures. You're welcome to reach out to me through anywhere you can find me other than directly at my house.
I was gonna
I
send a
mean,
pigeon to your house.
call first if you do that, and please after COVID. But online, I'm always happy to talk to anybody about anything having to do with my adventures, or if you want advice about with your own adventure, or just to ask somebody something. I'm happy to do that. So you can find me at Unite the Factions. I'll probably be doing more Unite the Factions events. We just had one this weekend that I wrapped up that I DM'd for. I'm not signed up for to DM anything else right now because I don't think they've announced their next event, but coming up soon.
And
We'll have.
maybe we'll get you at some of the virtual D&D weekends now that we've opened them to Canadians.
Oh my God! You let in the Canadians?
I we're gonna see how it goes. But they have maple syrup, so like, how could we not?
It's gonna be fine, eh?
Hey, it's gonna be fine, eh? Yeah, our wandering monster from this weekend was distinctly Canadian. He kept apologizing for hitting people. Spencer did.
Well, I know Spencer.
Spencer's lovely. But yeah, so we'll see you around at some conventions online, and maybe get you some more conventions so more people can hang out with you. But yeah,
Yeah.
so next week I have to consult my schedule because I'm apparently bad at calendars. That's right. Next week I have Teos Abadia, Alpha Stream on Twitter, on the show, and we're going to talk to Teos about some world building, some adventure writing, and Teos has done everything D&D, so we're going to talk about that too, as well as getting some as foreign language games. So he's been getting more foreign language games available at conventions, and so excited to chat a little bit about that. And yeah, got a good slate of guests lined up for February as well. I'm gonna have Brittany Hay, otherwise known as the Effin' Dungeon Mom on Twitter, Adam Hancock, Casper, whose last name I will absolutely butcher, from Norway, and then Brendan Lewis, and then we're gonna have my good friend Connor Self back on, my co-author on the epic I just wrote to round out February. So I've got a pretty good cast to follow up my amazing guests from today, and so looking forward to all of that. But for now, that is it for this episode of The Designer's Den. Until next time.